really important that I have and maintain fairly clean water, which is why on my table I usually have a jug with white, just clear water, and a jug with that I can pour the dirty water into. Okay, so I'm going to start with this quite orangey colour, and then I'm going to come to this more magenta light red. Okay, so I'm going to be starting with a kind of mixture between those two, and I'm going to need enough of this so that I can kind of fill the whole area, pretty much in one go with the same colour, if at all possible. So there's a colour that I'm fairly happy with, and then what I'm doing is I'm adding water to it. Okay, so I might want to bring in a little sort of scrap piece and just kind of test kind of how that looks and feels. It's very, very pale, but I want it to be that pale. Yeah, I'm going to be building on top of that, so that's actually quite a good start. Make sure I've got enough water. I want it to flow. One of the things that happens with watercolor paint, on the plate, in any kind of room indoors, or if you're outside, painting outside, and especially if you've got a sunny day, it'll dry and it'll evaporate quite quickly. So you've got to kind of be careful to keep your water fluid and moving. Okay, so I've got my kind of lightest colour here, so I can kind of basically bring that in across here, down this side, and then just try and keep it quite even. Because I've marked out where the white areas actually are, the lettering, the Coca-Cola logo, I can kind of move around that. But you see, I kind of want to be quite quick as well. We kind of nutritional information part over here. Now I've got to go in here. See how I don't just kind of let an edge dry if I can help it. I want to get in there and extend that wet edge that I've already painted, so that it kind of feels like it spreads evenly into the next area. Okay, so now I'm on to this other section here. If my paint was kind of drying off or whatever, I didn't have enough paint, that would be a good place to kind of stop and then kind of remix more paint. But as it stands, I've got enough, so I can just bring this in over here. Down in this section, need a bit more paint there, I think. I'll move my plate around. I kind of want to keep this orange red for the can there as my base, so I'm going to leave that there. But now I need to mix up a colour for the glasses. So you got to start with something. So I'm going to start with a little bit of green. Okay, because I see a little bit of green in it, and I also see a little bit of this kind of yellow ochre in it, perhaps. So like that. A bit too green to begin with, so I'm maybe going to come to this darker brown, and sienna, and just kind of darken it a little bit, just kind of make it a bit more somber, a bit more earthy. And that, how do I feel about that? I don't mind it. And maybe again just a wee touch of the Prussian blue. Yeah, that feels quite good. And then plenty of water. I've got to make sure I've got enough of this to cover these lenses the first time I go. Okay, so I need to, you know, what extra do I need of any of these colours? I'm going to make sure I've got enough of that colour that I'm happy with, because, you know, mixing up, you know, a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of the next thing, difficult to recreate each time. So get your base colour that you're going to have, and you'll have enough of it until you're kind of happy with it. Okay. So I'll start up here because it's highest up, yeah. And literally all I'm going to do is get that kind of colour running through there. Now, the correct term for laying down flat watercolour for you, grab the edge, the wet edge, and you continue that colour flowing down to get a kind of even, flat layer, is a wash. So that's kind of a watercolour wash that's just been created over that lens. A lot of watercolour painting, you know, real professional watercolour brushes, you know, they can be really quite big. People working at a big scale for watercolour, using heavy board, heavy watercolour paper. Sometimes the paper is stretched, you know, so they wet it first, and then they kind of, while it's wet, they tape it down as it dries out, it stretches it, and that to some extent prevents the buckling that you get on paper in a sketch pad like this, you know, so it stays fairly flat. And that allows you to do these kind of big expansive washes, you know, for a sky or for the sea or something like that. You have to lay down this even watercolour. Okay, but for this I'm pretty happy with kind of how that's gone, and I don't even think I need to suck up any edges of colour there. So again, I'm fairly happy with that. I want to leave that kind of alone. So my next step, I'm probably going to come over to this area, which ostensibly is black. Yeah, it's been printed black. I'm going nowhere near my black watercolour paint for this. Apart from anything else, it's not really, you know, just because something is, you know, painted black, or it's dyed black, it's a material and it's been dyed black, it doesn't look black. Yeah, because light still bounces off it. So for example, in this area here on the photograph, you see it's actually quite light. It's catching the light of the surface of paper, the card that it's on. And there's another kind of highlight area, probably from the book. It's a bit darker here, and that's kind of the reflection of the paint tray that's been caught on the can. Here, just above where the back end of the word calories, you've got a wee bright highlight. Remember, can't get whiter than the white of the paper, so I'll be wanting to keep that. And just above sugar here as well, there's a bit that's really bright. So even though this is black, I'm going to be mixing up a colour that I'm going to use that's ostensibly going to be a grey, but it's going to be quite a light grey to begin with. I'm going to turn my plate around again, and I'm going to go back to my water here. And I want to mix up a grey. I want it to be fairly neutral. So that in itself is quite a difficult thing to do, because as I said, I'm going nowhere near black. So I don't just take black and add wash to it to make grey, because really black as a colour doesn't occur in nature. Okay, so you know, you're much better off creating something very close to black but with a more natural colour. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So here I've got a dark brown, a burnt sienna, and here I've got a Prussian blue. I can get pretty close with just those two colours. I could also bring in a little bit of the red, a little bit of the magenta. Those are the ones I'm going to kind of work with to get very close to a kind of black, and from that with the water get a grey. So I like to start with my burnt sienna and kind of lay that down. Make sure I've got enough of it. It obviously has a very brown characteristic. Might not be able to see it so much on that plate, but obviously if I bring it on the paper, you can kind of see the kind of brownness of it, especially against the blue there. Okay, so now I'm going to go to this Prussian blue. It's quite dark blue. I'm going to add some of that, and it starts to feel quite inky, and you get a sense of, you know, which one is stronger. And it's the Prussian blue that is kind of won out there. Okay, so if I want something to have a kind of bluish grey, I might, you know, might be happy enough with that, but I actually want it to be fairly neutral. I'm going to go back to my brown, I'm going to bring it back into it until I feel that it's neither brown nor blue. Okay, more of a kind of steely grey. That's kind of getting more to it, and just to kind of show you the difference. So that was the sort of brown it had. That's now what I've got there, which is pretty great. And it's actually, again, when you see it in relation to this white, gosh, it's dark, isn't it? It's really dark. So okay, I'm going to use that, but I'm going to need more water in it. More water in it. I'm going to need to be able to cover this whole area in kind of one go. What am I not going to do? Well, I'm certainly not going to go over the lettering if I can help it, and I'm also not going to go over the points that are highlight points. So one of the things that I can do, by the way, look at my brush. Yeah, it's I'm going to do this entire painting with this one brush. But notice that, you know, it's quite a thick brush, but it's also got a, you know, a reasonable point to it. Yeah, that wee tip point. Yeah, and so what you kind of learn to do is you learn how to be able to use that point. So what I want to do here is I want to be able to preserve my highlights. So what I do with my brush is I just make sure where I'm going to go around is going to leave me a highlight point there. Yeah. Okay, so the next kind of main wash that I need to do is going to be on the aluminium areas. And of course they've got really bright highlights on them as well, so I need to be kind of careful not to paint over those highlights. You know, they've got to preserve those as best I can. Okay, so probably at this stage now it would be good to be able to tidy off one of the colours. I feel most confident I can recreate the dark grey kind of colour that I need. Right? Whereas I feel like it would be helpful to have the other colours there, you know, the kind of green that I used for the glasses, the red that I used for the coat can. So I'm just going to clean that off and, you know, dry my plate as well. I want to keep it dry. So one of the ways that I'm going to try and make the aluminium parts feel kind of different to the grey at the moment that's going to be black, and this will get much darker. So I'm not kind of fussed about that. But one of the things that I want to do is I want to give this more of a kind of blue tinge. So it should still feel kind of grey, but maybe with more of a blue tinge, and also feel a wee bit lighter as well. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm going to go with that. Okay, so I'm going to start with my dark blue, Prussian blue. Actually caught a bit of orange into that, but it won't hurt because I'm actually going to my brown. And you know, let's have a look. I'm going to take some of this lighter blue and just pull that in, just a touch. Okay, and let's see how that feels in comparison to that. It's definitely lighter, and it's definitely a bit bluer than what I had before. Yeah. Okay, so that's I like that. That's kind of what I'm going to use. I'll start on this kind of back base of the crushed can, yeah, and I'm looking right now where are the brightest highlights. I'm just wanting to make sure that I'm aware of those before I kind of go and accidentally paint over them, which should be a bit of a mistake. Rather not do that. So there's a kind of highlight that sort of forks up there, so that's okay. I've got that, preserved that. Come down here, and the other main highlight is down at this side between the red, just here, just at the edge of where the red graphics kind of start. So I'm going to kind of go down here and over that. Crash into it, and then I should be able to just have that go over pretty much all of this, all of my pencil lines, just coat over them. Still see my pencil lines through, and again, that's another fundamental thing about watercolour painting is, you know, you can still see your pencil lines through it. That works pretty well. I like that. So now I want to look at the really dark black kind of plastic on the glasses, which we're going to get very dark later, a bit like here. And so I need something for those parts as well. So I've still got this light blue that I've used for the aluminium. If I now take my sort of dark brown into that, you know, I can make it quite a bit darker, a bit more of the Prussian blue, a bit more of the brown, and a little bit of this magenta. You know, I can get it feeling really quite dark. Yeah, I quite like that. Okay. And so for that I'm going to use, you know, it for this flat layer to the arms of the glasses and around the rim, the lenses. So what I kind of want to do, I'm looking at the shadow and I'm trying to think about the colour of it and what it needs to be, because it's on a piece of white card. But of course the lenses themselves, you know, that are casting a bit of a shadow, they're going to give off some of that green. So I might use some of this colour, which I've still got on my plate around here, for that shadow. But I'm not sure I want it to be exactly the same as this. Just a wee bit lighter, certainly to begin with, and maybe a little bit more blue. Now, one of the things we can do, obviously this is dried up, but there's still pigment there. So as I take water to it, you know, I can basically reactivate it and sort of get that colour, but you know, you have to do it and get it with enough water and get it kind of flowing again. But of course, you've added a bit of water. It generally comes up a bit lighter, I find, because you know, you have to add quite a bit of water to sort of reactivate it. So it's usually a bit more transparent, a bit lighter. And I want a bit more kind of just sort of blue into it. I did it at the edge there because I wasn't quite sure how much of it I wanted. I can always kind of bring a bit more in if I need to. I'm happy enough with that, I think. Okay. So just kind of looking at this shadow, it kind of starts down here, kind of wee shape like that, and then it gets in quite close to this rim, and then from here it kind of comes out and meets this edge of the can. It's certainly a bit darker here, so at the moment I just need it to be even. And then also it can be seen on the inside here. So I'm going to use the same colour and go over the lens, but because it's an additional layer, it's going to look a bit darker. And I'm now looking in there, and I'm also seeing some other shadows. So I'm seeing a shadow that comes from one of the legs. It comes down like this, and then comes into that green shadow, kind of joins up with it. And then there's another one that kind of comes up here. It's a lot more crisp, crosses over about up here. You see a little bit of it there. Certainly see a bit more of that one there. And then over here, you see a little bit of the shadow in there. But I'm also seeing, some of the shadow from the glasses on the actual surface of the paper. Okay, so now I've got a little bit of shadow there that suggests that it's now an object sitting on a surface. Okay, so the shadow for underneath the Coke can itself, I've got two main light sources in this room actually, so I've got a kind of double shadow there. And like everything else with watercolour, you want to go for the lightest first. So shadows tend to get lighter as they kind of get further away from the object, or changes if the object is raised up off the surface. But essentially, if it's on the surface, then as the shadow comes away from the object, it tends to kind of lose its darkness, its intensity of shadow, probably because light's coming in from other directions, bouncing off different things and kind of getting in at it. So shadows are usually darkest and they're most intense in next to the object, if the object is sitting on a flat surface. So, again, I can go through a similar kind of process. I just need to decide on my colour. Now here's the thing, because I've got this grey and I've got this kind of more bluish grey, not much of a, you can't really discern very much between them at the moment. And I've got this kind of also grey shadow there. But over here it's got a little bit of a pink aspect to it. And the reason for that, of course, is because there's some reflection of the red of the can going onto the paper. But that's something I can probably add in a little bit later. Or I could decide to do it wet on wet. So I could decide, you know, if I do my grey first, I might then decide to sort of bring in some of the pink and kind of let it go in wet on wet and sort of spread out. Okay, so I'm going to work on this fairly neutral grey. So I'm going to reactivate this, which I'm going to use for my shadow. And I'm going to get it nice and watery. It'd been ideal not to have mixed those two together, so I'm now over here, kind of trying to stay away from adding that green in. But you know, we're working with fairly light shades, so it's not the end of the world, whichever way I do it. Okay, so what I want to do, I want to think about where that shadow starts. It's really about here. Lay that right down. I'm going to look for how the shadow comes out, and I'm definitely free painting this. I'm not drawing a line first of all. You know, shadows don't tend to have hard outlines. Yeah, so try and sort of be able to assess the shape of your shadows. Think about it really carefully rather than drawing them first, if you can manage that. It takes a little bit of most thing it takes is confidence. I'm going to give this a go. You know, and again, it's always going to be the case that you are not wanting to kind of overly work your paper, overly work your paint. And you kind of want to get it down and kind of get out, as it were. Okay, so that's kind of where that shadow kind of starts and emanates from. It's down there. And so with that, you know, there'll be darker shadows, and that we worked on quite a bit. And in fact, I already want to kind of get a slightly more fuzzy edge to that. Just feels like it needs it. And then in here, I want to get some of that pink. I'm going to come around to here in my light pink. Cleaned off my brush a bit. Some of that light pink. Let's see how this goes. I'm conscious of the way that the paper is kind of working there a wee bit. I'm just going to actually, you know, it goes all the way up into here, and so I just kind of wanted to do that and then let it do its own thing. Now it's really pooling down here, so again I want to take my brush, just got nothing in it, and I just want to soak up that pigment. Just don't want it to be quite as intense as that. And at that I'm probably quite happy. Maybe just a little bit of lifting here as well. And again, I want to leave that to dry before I go into any further detail. Okay, so the next thing that I want to kind of start building up with a little bit more detail and, you know, different colours in it is going to be the red section in the can. So some of the things that I need to be particularly careful of is the fact that in this area you've actually got reflections of the lettering in there. So it's quite a lot of complicated sort of shapes, but I also don't want to do pencil lines around each of them, so I want it to feel a little bit more natural and convincing there. So that's something I've kind of got to be quite careful about. In this session I'm going to try and add a little bit more complexity of colour into the red part of the Coca-Cola can. So I want to start with the same kind of base red that I had for the paler elements. Yeah. The reason for that, even though I'm going to be, using more kind of purple reds, maybe some more yellowy reds in places, I want it to still have unity. So I want it to still, at its base, have the same kind of fundamental red that I started with. So I remembered that I had used quite a bit of this orange, and then had a little bit more of this kind of magenta pink colour into it. Okay, now already I've got, this is already going to be stronger, and as you know, the more layers you put on, the stronger it's going to get. So that in itself, without me even changing the red at all, is already going to give me some, additional kind of depth and strength to certain areas. So I can start working with that just straight up. Kind of key point that people don't necessarily appreciate is that even when you're painting, you're still noticing things and you're still drawing. Yeah, so you can still see new things, and with the paint and where you're putting kind of lights and darks, and you might see an area that before when you were kind of initially painting it, you thought was bigger than it is. So when you come to put the darker colour on, maybe you're putting it in a more accurate, precise position. Position that now kind of makes more sense. Okay, so I've got the crushed can of Coca-Cola, fairly, you know, quite well resolved in some areas. Yeah, I mean, if you zoom in, you're going to see raggedy edges and whatnot. You can certainly improve things, and I will certainly have to come back later and look at tonal values that are also running through the white lettering, because I haven't really done any of that at this point. And certainly there's probably a little bit more work that maybe needs to be done, particularly on this lip, this kind of edge of the aluminium at the top of the can. It doesn't feel right, it feels too thin, and also in the black here, you know, it doesn't feel like it's how should I put it, kind of you know, a deep enough black, a crisp enough black in places. It feels too kind of indistinct. I'm quite happy about the way that the aluminium at the base of the can looks, you know. It's fairly simple and straightforward, and kind of the shapes there from a distance read quite well. And sometimes what the artist is doing is kind of making judgments about you know, when something is working okay, and you know, not to you know, to allow it to be that way, and not to overwork it. Definitely with watercolour, it's a difficult thing not to fidget and fiddle and kind of overwork stuff, you know, so it's something to bear in mind.